Okay, you're on. What's the other thing? It's crazy. Renaming. A little feedback.
Okay, so I'm muted and I've turned the sound off.
So did you come in with unmuted?
No.
Okay.
But my speakers were up, and so
Oh,
your microphone's picking up my speakers.
gotcha.
So I've just muted the speakers.
Okay,
So we'll be able
Gus.
to hear sound through your speakers.
Correct.
So we don't have to do any sound or anything.
And this is loud over here. Let me show you this polls over here real quick. So I'm gonna do the first one, and then you just hit the poll section. You gotta go on the down button. I'll be doing poll number 5. You would hit poll number 6.
Okay, so 5 is
And they can't see this.
right. So 6 is the last at the end. Beautiful.
I'm gonna do it there. Should have maybe had a maybe section. But if you remember, if it doesn't, if you're going too much and I don't catch you, it's not going to be the end of the world.
Well, I think we need to do something for a. So now the other thing is whenever you get the results, they don't save. So we got to screenshot.
Oh, so
those
maybe,
somehow.
yeah, remember to write them down. Who's ever on that in.
How do you screenshot? You know?
I don't know.
Or do you just take a picture with your phone?
No,
Actually,
just
that would probably work.
hit it that way. Could be it. There's the chat. There's the breakout room.
So are you going to?
We're not
keep,
going
are you
to
gonna
any
record
breakout.
our whole half hour?
Honestly, right now it's recording.
Okay.
Unfortunately, and I can look at
That
it.
would just
Good evening, everyone. This is the Art of Fruit Tree Pruning Workshop webinar. And so I just first wanted to introduce myself and our co-presenter tonight. I'm Greg Felsen. I'm with Montezuma County Extension here in Cortez as the director.
I'm Gus Westerman with Dolores County Extension. And yeah, pleased to have everybody with us tonight. And for those of you who are familiar with our normal live presentation that we've done for years, this is our first go at doing this virtually. And so bear with us. But once again, we appreciate you all. And for those of you who've been to the live version, I'm sorry, but you will still have to deal with my wonderful artwork later on. But yeah, once again, bear with us. We hope that everybody gets some good information out of it. And with that, I will turn it back over to Greg.
Awesome. Thanks, Gus. I'm just going to go through a few logistics for tonight. We are going to be showing a number of different videos throughout the presentation. So just want to remind you that if your audio volume is low, you might want to turn that up a little bit because we will be showing videos throughout the presentation. In addition to that, please remember to mute your little screen there so that we're not getting any background noise throughout the presentation. Also, throughout the presentation, we are going to have time to answer a lot of questions. So if you know where the chat area is in our Zoom area, which is usually at the bottom of your screen with a number of different things, type in the chat room your questions. And either when I'm presenting Gus will look at the chat room, or vice versa. And then we'll have different times throughout the presentation that we can answer those questions. In addition to that, we'll leave a lot of time at the end of the presentation for any of your questions that might come up during the time. And then I just wanted to go over that I'm going to take over a little bit of the high altitude fruit tree project, give you a little bit of a information and history around where Gus and I actually do a lot of pruning, kind of look at the basics of pruning and go through equipment that's used in pruning for success. And then we're going to switch up where Gus is going to take over more of the pruning theory and techniques, tree forming for your pruning needs, and then rehabilitation pruning. And rehabilitation would be defined as if you have trees in your backyard or your orchard that haven't been pruned in at least 3 years or more, kind of looking at those techniques to help you out with your pruning needs. In addition to that, we just wanted to let you know that kind of the main goal of the presentation tonight is take that intimidation away from you, or take it all the way out of pruning. Sometimes we get nervous about really getting into our trees and the branches on there, and don't want to, hit that prune that we think that's going to destroy the tree or not. But we really want to get you comfortable with this webinar, at least with this webinar, that you feel a little more confident each year when you go out and prune. But before we get rolling completely in the presentation, we wanted to poll everyone of what their experience is with pruning. So I'm going to put up a poll here on the screen, and we're going to give you about 45 seconds. And if you can see, the first question will be, how much experience do you have with pruning? So if you're coming in here tonight and you're a beginner, obviously click the beginner button. If you're a novice and have some experience with pruning, but don't have a lot and want to learn more tonight, definitely hit the novice. And then if you're a professional, you can tell us everything that we're telling you wrong, or you should be leading the presentation as well too. But if anybody across the board of all levels, we just want to know who's in our webinar tonight. So it is open, and I'm going to give you about 40 seconds to click on things. Looks like maybe everyone's got it in there now. It doesn't look like anymore. So I'm going to end the polling. And it looks like we've got both a lot of beginners and novice pruners in here tonight, which is great. And then please, for the proficient members that are here tonight, we all know that there's different ways to prune. And if you have other techniques that we don't share here tonight that might be good for other members of our webinars, to please speak up during that time. Just to show you everyone in here. Did you get that, Gus? Perfect. All right. So we just wanted to share a little bit more tonight of, like I mentioned earlier, where Gus and I work at our high altitude fruit tree project. And that's located in Yellow Jacket, Colorado, which is about 15 miles north of Cortez. And it's our Southwest Colorado Research Center. and it sits at about 7,000 feet, is why we call it high altitude, obviously. And if you can see the red box in there, that's the 3-acre area where the orchard is located. So this fruit tree project started way back in 1991, and it is a dual partnership between CSU Extension of both Dolores County, where Gus works, and Montezuma County, where I'm at. It's also a great partnership between our extension offices and our agriculture experiment stations, which are all located throughout Colorado. So we definitely wanted to highlight a few people. And so the market or the manager and main researcher out at the Yellow Jacket Research Center is Miss Katie Russell. And she's accompanied by Emily Lockhart, which is her research associate. Also, the farm technician and administrative assistants, a great couple, Jerry and Netta Mahaffery. And we could not do the work that we do out there with our whole team. So big thanks to them and our team that work out there. And then we wanted to highlight the originator, who was Gus's predecessor, Dan Fernandez, that got the project going. And so Dan Fernandez was a lifelong extension agent and established this with my predecessor, Jan Senin. And big kudos to them as we're carrying on their legacy and tradition with those trees out there. And so presently out at the orchard project, we are evaluating 75 different fruit tree varieties, including 21 field apples, 43 trellised apple varieties, 2 apple varieties planted in a super high density, and 5 peach varieties, 4 pear varieties, and 3 plum varieties. I should also mention, like I said, the 3 acres that are in the orchard are just part of a larger 155-acre area out at the research center, which they're doing everything from research in irrigated and dry land crop plots that are out there. For example, alfalfa, dry beans, cover cropping, and wheat varieties that they're doing a lot of research on. So if that's an interest to you as well too, please use that resource that in our area to gain more information. And so with the fruit trees, what are we evaluating on there? It is a bit of a research demonstration area as well too. So we're looking at evaluating different species, varieties, rootstocks, irrigation, disease management, pest management, and grass trials as well too out there. As you can see here in this slide, we wanted to show you the production that is specifically in our apple production that we had throughout the last 5 years. Everyone who was out there last year know that we had a very large crop, and also in 2018 a very large crop. But I think if we all remember in our area, 2018 that led into 2019, we had a major winter weather, which we hope we will get back here in Southwest Colorado, some more regular winter weather. But looks like a storm coming in this weekend. Not sure if it'll hit so much of our area, but it looks like the Front Range of Colorado will definitely get some. So definitely our production, like anything else in agriculture, depends on the conditions that we have out there. And so it was really unique that obviously the whole year, last year and into this year, with the COVID-19 pandemic, changed sort of the way we were able to distribute the apples and the fruit in our orchard. And so instead of having what we do every year, a major U-pick, in the September fall harvest season, we had to organize a different way to distribute a lot of the apples that we had. We definitely still harvested a bunch for the local community and harvested with small teams so that we could get that out to our locals in half bushel boxes of different varieties. But we also took the opportunity to coordinate with a care and share food bank of the Rockies so that we could donate our big harvest to a lot of the food pantries and food banks in our area, in Dolores, Montezuma, La Plata, Archuleta, and then also to the Ute Mountain Ute Nation and the Navajo Nation. So we definitely wanted to highlight what we did last year onto that end. And so I'm going to try to show a little video that highlights that real quick.
Okay, now you may need to escape out of that presentation or something. Oh, I guess you're going there.
No, it was there, but it's not coming on. Bear with us.
So we'll get the YouTube video kind of queued up.
There we go.
Okay, so now pause it whenever it comes up because you're not sharing. And then you'll have to minimize the presentation. You'll have to go back to your share screen and share a different screen. That's insane. Oh, there we go.
So pause it.
You come up.
Yeah, now go share. Go up to your share screen. There you go. There it is. Okay, go full screen and play.
Come out here, you're like, holy cow, man, look at this. There's a Swiss Gourmet, or there's a John Red, or there's this, you know, improved Macintosh variety or Honeycrisp. Now we're talking. Now we understand what flavor is all about.
Backyard fruit production is a very hot topic for a lot of people. A lot of people in Montezuma and Dolores counties grow backyard fruit trees, and we're able to help them with their management to make sure that their trees thrive through the work that we do here.
If people have one successful year with a tree or with vegetables, they get it. They become hooked. And that's one of our jobs, and hoping we can get people excited about what it means to grow.
Fruit going out to people in need. The silver lining that came out of the pandemic for us at this orchard is now we have connections with all our local food bank agencies, our local food distribution agencies, as well as Care and Share Food Bank of the Rockies that distributes all throughout Colorado.
Okay, I don't know if everyone could get that full video and hear all of the video. We're not going to win any Emmy Awards tonight. However, maybe at the end, I can hopefully show that one more time again. Let's see here. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, now you're gonna have to go back and share your screen again.
Let me get out of here. Like that one. All right, bear with me. I'm gonna skip back to the PowerPoint real quick here. Do you see the PowerPoint? Yeah, all good. All right. That reminded me that off the beginning, we saw Mr. Darren Parmenter start off the video, and just want to also put our big thank you to Darren for organizing the Southwest webinar series as well too. Now we want to talk about different management styles that we do have out at the Orchard Fruit Tree Project. This would be considered kind of freestanding fruit trees. Mostly you're looking at apples right there. We also have a lot of high density fruit trees and super high density fruit trees. Now they would be, you know, the industry standard for commercial production all throughout our country and other places in the world as well too. So we have a variety of management styles when you do have the opportunity to come out to Yellow Jacket and visit our orchard. Now we want to show, as Gus mentioned before, if this was a regular year, if you were here in person, Gus would be talking to you and myself in our shop and really explaining the different tools before we went out into the orchard. And I know Gus and I the last couple of weeks have been out with snowshoes on and definitely doing the pruning. But usually, you know, this time of year for an in-person pruning workshop, you definitely would be on snow, which it is now, or getting very, very muddy as well too. So just want to review just a few personal things on the basics of pruning. And just like anything else with your gardening, as well as maybe your lifestyles or anything, everything is personal. And it must be customized to your location, growing method, and goals. And so as we know here in Southwest Colorado, we have so many different microclimates to our particular spots where we garden or have fruit trees or orchards as well too. What are your specific growing methods and goals when you look at your backyard fruit trees or your orchard as well too? So be thinking that in mind of how you organize your management styles personally. You're also talking a lot about tree symmetry. Support and strength are critical factors. So what I like to look into is, you know, with life as well too, you're looking at a lot of balancing. And you don't want any of your trees being too strong on one side or too weak on another side. And trying to look at that perfect tree symmetry for the health and benefit of that tree. And then obviously what makes everything grow is the sun. And so really looking at that tree when you're looking around to reducing the effects of shading is essential. There's also your first chance to thin. And we know we want good quality fruit, so thinning is important. The goal here is early and consistent fruit production. And so really being inspired to get out there so that you are getting that fruit production and quality needs that you're looking for. Kind of want to show you some pictures of some before and after. And we'll go into that more in depth with some of the videos later in the presentation. And so now we want to talk about pruning equipment. So Sterilization of all of your tools are very, very important. Obviously, you do not want to be spreading diseases from your equipment to your trees. And so we recommend using a 91% isopropyl alcohol on your tools to get them that sanitation and sterilization needs that they require. Different pruning equipment that we recommend, and we'll go through that more in this presentation, is hand saws, pruners, loppers, air-powered equipment are all accessible. Maybe last resort, getting out the chainsaw if you have some very serious needs with your trees, if they have been definitely neglected for a long time and are really gnarly, you might have to get in there with that. But definitely want to be very careful with any chainsaw needs. Very important, just like when we cook our vegetables or prepare our vegetables, I should say, keeping equipment or specifically pruning equipment very sharp, so it makes those good cuts, and keeping them clean is essential to your pruning needs. Using 3-point ladders, so regular ladders that you'd use to get on top of your roof or garage are just those 2 points, but pruning ladders have those 3 points to them for better sturdiness. And usually, you know, before or after, or both, you want to go back to your equipment and make sure you're keeping up with those to keep them as clean as possible and sharp as well too. So let's look at a few different pruning equipment. So here on your left-hand side of your screen is your anvil pruners. And on your right-hand side would be your bypass pruners. We recommend the right-hand side of your bypass pruners. We recommend that because it has a sharper cut to it. Whereas the anvil, as you can see, the little area that they go into, or the opening into that, sometimes can get debris in it, different ways that it gets caught, and when you're crushing down on things and branches and all of that, isn't the best for it. You want that clean cut with a bypass, sort of like those scissors that really go into those branches and cut them appropriately. So there's obviously many different pruning saws that have wood, fiber, and aluminum handles. Some fold in. And once again, going back to what is your pruning management? What works best for you is to look at when purchasing equipment. Now, if we look at pole pruners for some of those higher branches in different areas, you have the nomadic on the one side that do have the bypass pruners attached to it. And usually for home use, you can look at a combination that has a saw on it and a bypass pruner with a drawstring that can help your pruning needs. Wanted to show you again the different type of loppers that are out there. Once again, you could have handles that have wood, fiberglass, aluminum as well too. And then on your upper left corner of the screen there, you're going to see a gear assisted lopper. And this provides a little bit more power for your branch cutting. However, it's going to require more strength and more area and length of an area to really get out there and take those branches down. So it's not your only tool to use, but it's good to have a variety of different tools for the different branch structures that you have. Once again, here's a gas operated, or I'm sorry, open air hand pruner on the left, and then on the right again is those bypass pruners as well too, to be looking at. And we prefer the ones on your upper right. Next, we'll look at, and we'll go into, again, more depth of this, and there's a video on it that can show you, is your different spacers. So you can use wood or aluminum spacers. And what's really good about these is, as we're trying to get that as much sunlight to your different branches and really getting those branches going horizontally, you might need spacers to go to the main part of the tree to really shape your different branches and create really good shaping and symmetry onto your tree. Last up, we're going to show you, this is our full rig structure. We call it the rig, and when we head out to do our pruning, as we showed earlier, we have a variety of different equipment and tools for our needs out into the orchard. So that was the first area on equipment. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Gus, who has much more experience than I do in the orchard, to give you some lessons today on the art of pruning. Oh, we did?
But yeah, I kind of took care of them in the chat.
Perfect. We'll jump on, Gus.
Okay.
You're going to have to unmute. Let's go on.
Sounds good. Okay, well, away we go. So once again, Gus Westerman, Dolores County Extension, and thanks to Greg for giving us that great rundown on some of the basics of what we're going to be going over for the rest of the evening, and some of the tools that you're going to see us using on to that end. So I'd just like to a quick pause right now. And I know we had a couple of questions in the chat, one regarding fruit tree varieties that could possibly do well at 8,000 feet. I did put my email address in the chat, so please fire me an email. I do have a few recommendations on things that can work. Once again, at that kind of elevation, you're looking at a tree that will survive, but may or may not bear fruit. So that's kind of the tricky part whenever you start getting into those. The other was some corrective pruning, talking about a tree that may be leaning over and how to go about that. And we'll be talking about some of that more in this upcoming portion. So the first thing, we've got a quick video for you. And some of you who have been in our live workshop have remember my whiteboard here. So we've got the whiteboard back, and we did a quick video, and I really hope this works. We're going to try this, and if the audio doesn't work on this, we'll just make sure our settings are,
Don't mute yourself. Double click.
okay. So I think this is going to work. Let us know in the chat if the audio is not coming through.
Just a little bit of pruning theory. And for this, you have to deal with my final artwork here. This, as you may or may not know, does represent a tree that hasn't been pruned. This is essentially.
Okay, so no audio there. We need the right. Now, is the audio setting? Here, mute that then. Okay, we'll try this again and see if it works.
Of the season, and in the spring, whenever you're ready to get started. So we have the ground right here.
we have our root system, and we have our tree. And so all of these components, the root system and the tree itself, are going to be very important considerations whenever we're working on the pruning theory. As you can see, we have our tree, we have our scaffold limbs, what we call it, very simplistic representation, of course, it's just 2D. We have our scaffold limbs, and then these little lines are going to represent new first-year growth shoots coming from those scaffold limbs. And so we're going to talk about, the goal that we want to reach after this tree is pruned is that we enhance the light penetration coming down through the canopy. Of the tree. The reason that's important is because fruiting buds need sunlight to develop properly. Therefore, whenever you see neglected apple trees that haven't been pruned for years, you'll notice whenever they do have a nice crop of apples on them, that crop of apples is always around the outside of the tree because of the congestion and shading that keeps those fruiting buds from developing inside the tree. For a successful fruit tree, we want the fruit to be consistent throughout everything. So the first thing, we have our sunlight shining down. First thing we want to do is look at that tree. We want it to be symmetrical, we want it to be strong, and we want to open that canopy up. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to look at all these guys, these shoots growing straight up. That's just a ton of shade. The other thing we want to look for, any branches that are growing in towards the tree, in towards our central leader, which is the main trunk here. We want to get rid of those. Those are causing a lot of shade. So the first thing we're going to do, we'll come in, we want to remove a lot of these first year shoots that are growing straight up. We're going to get rid of a lot of shade off the top. Now we have these little branches that are growing inward. We want to take these out. Once again, that's going to enhance the amount of sunlight that can penetrate into the canopy. So we have some of these shoots coming up off of here, off of there. We've got these guys growing inward. We have these growing straight up. We have this one growing straight in. We get rid of that, that, and these two little guys here. So just from that work that we've just done on this tree, we can see now how much more sunlight is actually able to penetrate this canopy. We'll get a lot better penetration. Now what we'll notice, we still have a few of these little shoots that are growing out. We do want some of this first year growth. Say we have a little shoot coming out here or there. We really like those. These are going to be our new scaffold limbs because at some point, some of these larger limbs are going to have to come out. One consideration that we look at, once we have a scaffold limb that starts getting to the point where it's half the size of the central leader, it's about time to think about taking that out. So if we were going to take a large branch from this tree, we're going to look, and we really want symmetry. That's another focus. So we're going to look. This branch right here is taking up a lot of space between these two branches. And if we take this out and remove this entire branch right there, we get some symmetry back to the tree, which is really important. We also have developed a lot of sunlight that can now reach this scaffold limb that didn't before, which will stimulate some new growth, and we can regenerate some new fruiting root off of that. So these little twigs here represent our first year growth that will develop into our new fruiting root. Once again, same thing with these little guys here. So that is the basic premise whenever we're looking at doing the pruning. Another thing to consider, whenever we talk about the 30% of the canopy that we want to remove, the reason that 30% is so important is for anything we take off out of the canopy, any pruning cut we make is also going to shed root system because that tree won't have enough leaf material to support that root system. So as much as we prune, we're shedding roots. The reason that's important is because whenever the growing season starts in the spring, the tree comes out of dormancy. Essentially, the tree realizes that its root system is stressed and it wants to put on more leaf material to support regrowing that root system. So if you prune more than 30%, what's going to happen whenever you come back a year from now to prune that tree, it's going to look like this. And that means the tree was overly stressed. And you're going to get a huge flush of vegetative growth if you prune too much. And we don't want that. So that's where that 30% comes into play, is keeping that tree what we call in balance. And this tree that we have demonstrated here is out of balance. So therefore, to get it back into balance, it just takes very careful pruning. It's going to take multiple years to bring this back. And so every year, you're probably going to want to prune less than that 30% and prune very carefully, and only some of the most egregious branches that are there.
Okay, so that was just kind of an overview of, kind of what we can expect as we get started. And let's see if I can figure out our presentation here. There we go. So I'd like to go back up to the top where we had these before and after pictures here. And you can look on that upper left. That is that's typically what you're going to walk into whenever you show up in the springtime to start work. And you can just see there's a lot of vegetative growth. There's a lot of congestion going on in there, a lot of branches growing straight up, and that's creating a lot of shade. So that's our number one goal whenever we come in to start doing this, is we really want to open that canopy up. Sunlight penetration is essential. And all of our new fruiting buds that are developing, they require that sunlight. And so you'll notice if you have a neglected apple tree that hasn't been pruned for years, whenever it gets a crop on there, that production tends to be around the outside of the canopy. And the reason for that is that sunlight just can't penetrate into the canopy. And so pruning allows us to open that canopy up, let that sunlight penetration get in there. The other thing that you'll notice, we've cleared out a ton of congestion in there. And that we've gotten rid of all these branches that are crossing. Crossing branches are a problem because they can rub in the wind, create some wounding, and that's another vector for disease right there. So that can be an issue. Also, as we go through, any of those branches that are growing inward, straight up, that's creating a ton of shade for us. So we've gotten rid of those, and you can just tell a big difference between those two pictures right there. So we will move on back down through the presentation. Another consideration to look at whenever you're pruning is what rootstock is the tree on. That's going to determine the vigor of the tree. So you have your full-size rootstocks, like over there on the left, that EMLA 111. That's a big rootstock. You're going to get a big tree, and it's going to have a lot of vigor. And so your pruning definitely has to reflect that, as opposed to you go to that full right side, your EMLA 9 or NIC 29 or Bud 9. Those are heavily dwarfing rootstocks. So that's going to produce a tree that's about 20% the size of a full-size tree. So if you have a dwarf tree like that, of course, it's probably going to be on a trellis and a high density situation. So your pruning methods are going to be a lot different. So rootstock makes a lot of difference whenever you're coming into this. We'll come down. So another thing we want to look at that's very important to understand is the differences in the age of the wood that we're working with. Apples will not develop fruit buds until that third year. And so you go over on that far left side, that's third year wood right there, on the left side of that blue arrow. And so that's the portion where those fruiting buds are going to be developing. As we go into that second year growth, you can see those fruiting spurs. So this is a whip that we pruned off this season.
So therefore, those little spurs in between the blue arrows, those spurs developed last year. And so this year, those will actually potentially be some fruiting buds there. Now on the far right side, that's our first year growth. And so there, it's going to be a while before there's any fruit buds developing on that. However, so this year, that portion will start developing those little spurs like you see there in the middle. And then of course, that portion that's in the middle will then be where our new fruit buds are producing. And that's another thing we want to do when we're pruning is we want to recycle that fruiting wood. We want fresh fruiting wood because that's where you're going to get the best fruit. And so you're constantly, every time you prune, you're also encouraging new growth. And so that's something to really consider. You know, whenever there's different ways to prune that'll encourage growth the way you want it. And that's a big thing to understand that we'll talk about a little bit more. So right there, promoting new growth, you can see that perfect little whip coming right out right there. That's a great new branch, and it's actually growing in a desirable angle right there. So we thinned out around, but we're maintaining that. That branch is going to fill in a good open space that that needed to be filled. And once again, we're recycling that fruiting wood. So we'll talk about some of the pruning cuts. Your pruning cuts, of course, it's important. As Greg was talking about, the importance of having your tools clean and sharp. You know, you really want to make sure that those wounds are as good, clean cuts as possible, because that's really going to help with disease management and things like that. So you always want those cuts to be smooth, and you get a smooth cut with a sharp tool. You want to avoid flat cuts where the cut's straight up and you have that perfect horizontal surface where water could accumulate. Sometimes it's good to try to have those angled cuts so it keeps them drier. Once again, that's really going to help out with some disease management there. You want to avoid any tearing and bark peeling. Once again, any unnecessary wounding is not good. If you accidentally cut, which it always happens, happens to us all the time, you know, you make a cut that you're not proud of, it's good to try to smooth that out and try to get rid of that damage. You also, if you look at, I wish I had a better picture, but if you look at where a branch comes off of a leader, you'll notice there, it looks like a little collar right around the base of that branch. That collar is the vascular tissue coming up through where that vascular tissue goes up and around the branch. And so it's important not to damage that collar because that's damaging the vascular tissue that's going up and above and beyond that branch. So then that's going to cause some issues above that area. So you really want to be careful to stay out of that collar. And that collar is also where the healing from the branch is going to come from. So that's another consideration. So you never want to cut too close to the leader. And we also, especially in Southwest Colorado here, we really like to stay away from all the pruning paints and dressings and things. Our climate's dry enough to where those wounds will they'll dry themselves out. What can happen with some of those wound dressings and pruning paints is that those will actually hold moisture into the wound, which can then be an issue. That's where you're going to start to see some disease issues and things like that. We're dry enough here to where we do not need to use those. So now we'll talk about how much do you prune? And that's always the big question, you know, how much do you prune? Good rule of thumb for us, what we go for with apples is 30%. And that 30% will help keep the tree in balance. And you know, that's kind of the rule of thumb that we work off of, about 30% of the canopy. Now, whenever you're looking at a peach tree, it's totally different. Peaches, you can go 70%. And actually you want to, because peaches fruit on that first year wood. And so that's the whole idea when you're pruning a peach tree, is you're constantly wanting flushes of brand new growth constantly. So you're going to hammer those guys a lot harder than you will an apple. Takes apples 2 extra years to produce those fruit buds. So you want to be more careful. It's also personal, depending on your management and your goals. you know, whenever we're doing it, the first thing to do is just look at the tree, take a step back, look at it, walk around it and say, okay, where's the issues that I see in there? And once you start learning what to look for, some of those branches going straight up, some of the crossing branches, things like that, those will definitely jump out at you and you'll know, okay, that one's growing inward, that's a problem. This one's creating shade. And so, you know, they'll jump out at you and you'll know kind of where to start. And we always start pruning slowly. I like to start on top, kind of work down through the canopy. Of course, the first things you always want to do, any dead, dying and diseased branches, those have to go. Broken branches where you have damage or nasty wounds, you really should get rid of those. That's always a good idea. Now, of course, your dead branches do not count as as far as that 30%. Those just need to go. So dead branches always go, broken branches always go, and disease as best you can. If you see disease starting in, a lot of disease can be managed through pruning. So
what about root sprouts and water sprouts? Do they count into 30%?
okay, so we had a question, the root suckers and water sprouts. Now that's a good question. Usually they're small enough whenever those root suckers are coming up out of the ground from the rootstock, they're small enough to where they're not that big of a deal. But yes, those always have to go. Throughout the whole season, doesn't matter what time of year, you want to get rid of those root suckers because you want that rootstock supporting the tree. Those root suckers coming up are, so yeah, those root suckers are from the rootstock itself.
Great. And what about percentages on cherry trees?
Cherry trees, that's more like a plum tree. So you're just still, you know, that's a good question. You can go harder on your cherries and plums, much like a peach. You know, I'd say you can go 50 to 60% if you need to on those. Those are usually going to be more of an open center tree, so you're really going to be clearing out that middle section. We'll talk about some different growing methods as well, and definitely cherries and plums will fall right into that. But yeah, once again, your root suckers always have to go. And then your water sprouts, which is those real good big vegetative shoots usually coming up off the top of the tree and reaching for the sky, those definitely count as that 30%. So those absolutely count. And then we want to get in there, remove the congestion, crossing branches and twigs. And then of course, yes, all root suckers and water sprouts. Now, your heavy pruning can reduce your fruit production, but it can enhance your fruit size. Once again, pruning is your first chance of the season to thin. And getting in there and thinning out some of those fruit buds can really benefit you in the long run. We chemically thin out at Yellow Jacket, but there's a lot of people who hand thin. And the more work you can get done early on, so you can reduce some of that hand thinning, is really good to do, and this is the time to do that. So we're going to talk about some tips to make the job easier, and this may be a good chance to pause for a second and answer any questions that might come through. Feel free to unmute and talk. It's nice to hear people on these things. So I'll just pause for just a second, see if we have any questions.
Tris had one more on how do you smooth out a cut?
Okay, we had a question on how to smooth out a cut. So essentially, you have your leader and your branches coming up, and your pruner, you just get at a weird angle, and say you prune it off and it maybe prunes halfway through, and then you get a lot of tearing. You just want to come down a little bit further and prune out that damage without getting into the collar. So it's kind of a balance. You really don't want to get into that collar, but you want to get rid of as much damage as you can. So it's, yeah, just going below that damage and trying to get as much of that out of there as possible. So we're going to go through some of these tips. And I know Dan Fernandez, I believe he's on this call, and I'm sure he's looking at the third one down, avoiding the heading cuts. And he's thinking, what is he talking about? Because we always used to do that. Heading cuts were really a big deal, and it's a great way to promote really vigorous growth. But we've gotten away from that on some of our bigger trees to help keep them in balance. Sometimes some of those heading cuts could make things go a little bit crazy. So we've gotten away from that a little bit. But we want to know our goals. Those thinning cuts are key. That's what's going to get rid of a lot of that congestion and shading. We want to train for easier pruning. You're always pruning for next year. That's another thing to think about. Always prune for next year. Now the stubs, people ask about that. When you leave a stub, stubs can be really good because they can actually promote some really good new growth. And we'll show some examples of that further down. We also look at diameter base pruning whenever we talk about whenever you have a scaffold limb that's getting about 50% of the size of the main leader. It's about time to think about taking that out. And that also goes with a branch coming off of a scaffold limb. If a branch is getting about 50% of the size of that large scaffold, it's about time to take that off. And that helps to simplify the tree too. We want to know when to prune. You want to prune at the right time of year. We also look at tree height. This is a great time to try to control the size of that tree. Try to keep it the height you want it, keep it the size you want it. Then we want to simplify the tree. And we're also striving for more of that horizontal, about 60-degree angle on those scaffold limbs. Those flatter limbs like that tend to produce the best fruit. So that's really what we're striving for. And once again, it comes back to that light penetration. They're getting the most light. They're gonna have the best buds, the best fruit. So we're gonna go into detail on some of these here. So we're gonna know our goals. You know, are we pruning an apple, a peach, a plum, a cherry? So are we pruning a central leader tree like these guys here on the left, or an open center tree like this plum tree? You can see that open center plum tree. That's the management style that you're going to see a lot of plums like that. You're going to see a lot of peach trees that are open center like that. And you'll also see a lot of cherry trees that are open center. And so you're really trying to clear that out. You have the branches coming out, gathering that sunlight. And as you can see, you just really want to thin out a lot of that stuff, get rid of congestion. So you're doing those same kinds of things no matter what, but the management style or the style of your tree is going to dictate a lot of exactly how you do it. Any more questions, Greg? Okay.
Thanks for explaining that, because they didn't hear that in the first video.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll move down. We'll look at our thinning cuts. We like to remove the wood where it originates. So that means if you've got a branch, it's great to come back to where you have an intersection, so to speak. We don't like to just head off and have dead ends. And the reason for that is you want that branch, say you come out, you have a fork, and you're pruning back. You say you want to get rid of this branch here. You want to come all the way back down to that intersection and get rid of that branch. And then that growth is then going to be pushed into that next branch that's more desirable for your tree. So we like to remove wood all the way back down to where it originates. We don't like to dead end those cuts. That can cause some issue. Doing it that way, that calms the tree, and it'll help with your training and pruning for years to come. So it'll keep your tree from trying to go too crazy on you. So I've got another video here. Once again, I hope this works.
Yeah, check with people if they don't get it, aren't hearing it.
Yes, and if you're not hearing it, please, speak up or put it in the chat and let us know. Once again, we're working through this for the first time, so the technical issues are abound.
So now I'd like to take our tree model and zoom in on the end of one of our scaffold limbs. Now this could be more in the middle of the tree, it could be in the upper part, lower part, doesn't matter so much. Once again, we're going to just talk about some different places to make some of those critical pruning cuts as you go through. So for this, we're going to say this is our little collar. So we have our old growth here, this big scaffold limb. This is old growth there. Right up here, you can see this little collar. We get into our second year wood. And the reason you can tell that, we've got our little spurs that have started to grow out from this branch right there. And then up here on the very top, we've got first year growth there. We've got some first year shoots right there, down in here, and also those two guys right there. And now we've got some old mature fruit spurs that have been out there, some of those buds that have been producing fruit for us for a long time. So the things we want to get done with this branch, once again, we want to thin out congestion. So anything that's crossing, anything that's growing inward, which I should add some of those just for the sake of our demonstration. And we've got some crossing there. So we've got some congestion that's really going on up in this area. First thing we want to do is get rid of that. Once again, we're going to remove that, get rid of that shade, have good sunlight penetration down on our branch. So we want to maintain some fruiting buds. We also want to thin some out because too many is not a good thing. Pruning is also the time that we do our first thinning of the season to allow us to get a good fruit crop. And we're also trying to control the growth of the tree. So the first thing we want to do when we look at this branch, we want to come in. This one's growing inward, causing us a lot of shade. So those guys have to go. The next ones that really have to go. We want to get rid of these guys growing straight up. Once again, they're causing a lot of shade. If they are allowed to mature and produce fruit, growing straight up like that, they're going to be weak, prone to breakage, things of that nature. So now we'll come out to the very tip here and say this is on the upper portion of the tree. This is that point where that tree is trying to maybe grow a little bit too tall or a little bit further out. Now we have this portion right here, a real nice first year shoot coming right out of that branch. The ideal thing to do is to bring that branch right back to this point. And we're going to do a number of things by doing that. We're going to control the size of the tree by doing that. And we're also going to be able to promote some new shoots that can come off of that end later on next season. So the next things we want to look at, we have some branches that are growing down underneath. Not such a terrible deal. We do like to stay away from these. Most of our good fruit is at that 45-degree angle to more of a flatter angle coming off the upper sides of the branch because they get more sunlight. However, you can see right here, we have some crossing going on. Now this branch appears to be growing more downward than this. So if we're going to choose one of those, we're going to say that this branch is going to have a better chance of producing better fruiting buds. So the first thing we want to do, get rid of that. We'll maintain this and we'll be able to grow this out as new fruiting wood. As we come in, we can get rid of this just to thin out some congestion. We'll get rid of this one because it was right over shading out some of our old fruiting buds. So now we've cleared out a lot of congestion, but we also want to do some fruit thinning as well. Now, whenever you see these old fruiting buds, essentially you imagine an apple the size of your fist, and how many apples are actually going to fit in there? Not very many, right? So first thing we want to do is choose some of those buds. We could actually take off this whole deal right there. We'll promote these two guys. You could actually even take this off right there. So we're pretty much concentrating on this growing one apple, which will be great. Do the same thing here. Take off some of those. Once again, we're thinning out these fruiting buds. And this is something you want to do every year. The other thing is that is going to promote new growth. And we do want new growth because you constantly want to be adding new fruiting wood to the tree. New wood's going to give you better quality fruit. It's going to be more vigorous. You're going to get a lot of benefit out of that. Now, another thing I'd like to mention, we'll bring this shoot back here. Whenever we're pruning that off, there's a couple ways to do it. If you want to try to stimulate some new shoots out of this area, all you do is leave a nice stub right there. Try not to come back all the way flush to that collar that's right down in here. You can leave a nice stub. And what that's going to do is it's going to promote new growth. So over the next growing season, you'll see some shoots that may look like that. Whenever you come in to prune the next year, you can choose which one of those shoots you'd like to keep to develop. So of course, these both growing inward, you'd want to get rid of those. Maintain this little guy right here.
Okay. So I hope everybody could hear that, but that was essentially just going over how to thin out some of that congestion and really what you should be looking for whenever you start getting into this and starting your pruning work. All right, so we'll move on to, and I think I had another example. We'll talk about the stubs in just a minute. That's in a slide that's just coming up. So we'll bring back the heading cuts. So heading cuts can be a really interesting tool. Now on a larger tree that's established, it's got, you're out there trying to control a lot of that first year vegetative growth. We don't like to do those heading cuts so much because it tends to make the growth more difficult to control. So a heading cut would be, you can see this picture here where our blue arrow is, a heading cut's just taking that terminal bud off. Now there are a lot of places where we do use this, and whenever we're looking at a high density tree, for example, where we want those small branches to really produce and branch out vigorously, we use those heading cuts. You can also use a heading cut for directional pruning. You can see the buds on there, how they're facing different directions. You can try to force growth from one of those buds using a heading cut. So if this cut was made where that blue arrow is, if you look just to the left of that blue arrow, you see that little bud there pointing up. That's the bud that's going to be forced essentially. So you can do some directional pruning with that. So it can be a good tool, but as we're generally pruning and looking at really trying to thin out congestion, especially in the upper reaches of a tree, we try to stay away from those heading cuts and we take the whole thing. It's kind of an all or nothing deal. Once again, heading cuts most definitely have their place. They're a great tool, but really they're used to promote vigor. And if you want that vigor, that's the time to use it. If you don't want that vigor and you're really trying to get a tree under control, it may not be the best time. So we'll talk a little bit about training. The proper training is going to make your pruning easier and more predictable for years to come. And so what this is talking about is this is where our spacers and limb tying and things like that come into play. And this happens from the first time a tree is planted. As soon as it starts getting branches, you can start training those branches to grow how you want them. And those spacers and string are the ways we do that. We also, you also prune to create that tree structure that you're going for. Your spacers and ties to prop the limbs and get them going in that more horizontal 60-degree direction works very well. And then of course, maintaining your central leader and a central leader tree is important to do. Okay, so then we'll move down here. Let's see. So here's a good, some good examples of using spacers. You can, pardon me, on the left here, you can see this spacer is pushing this little guy right here down in that more horizontal position, about that 60-degree. And that's where we want that limb. That limb's going to fill in that space well. Same thing on this upper right. You can see how we just lodge that spacer right up in the crotch of this branch there, and it comes down and hits those. So I think the next one, we've got another little short video of some demonstrations on how to use those spacers. So now that we have our tree pretty well pruned up, the next thing we have to think about is the shape of the tree. Once again, as we talked about before, the ideal direction for some of these scaffold limbs and branches to be for strength is about that 45-degree angle from the tree. You don't want it coming too vertical or too horizontal. As you can see, we have a very nice branch here. This is first year growth from last year. However, you can see due to the branch that was in this area before, it started trying to grow too vertical. Therefore, we're going to bring out our spacers. And the way we use these is you find the spacer that's the right length to put the branch where you need it. You can see these have little barbs. The first thing is you put the barb into the branch that you want to redirect. And you get it set. As you can see, we're now at a nice 45-degree angle to where this branch is now going to replace this open space from the branch we just removed. Now we have one more good candidate for a spacer right up in this area. Once again, we just place that branch in there. We're getting a nice angle. It's going to fill in that space very well. Just some considerations. You want to make sure that your spacers are clean and dry because you are inserting a barb into the tree itself. So sanitation is always important. And once again, methods like we've talked about before, by using 91% isopropyl alcohol works great. And this is the basics of forming a tree. Now, one thing to remember, these spacers will have to be removed by about the end of June. Otherwise, we can cause some pretty severe tree damage from the tree actually trying to grow around the spacer and creating a wound.
Okay, so that was just kind of a little demonstration on how the spacers work and kind of what to expect from those. Spacers come in all different shapes and sizes, from, you know, just a few inches long to a couple feet long. And as Greg showed, they come in wood and aluminum like that. We like the aluminum ones because they do have those barbs and it helps them stay in place. As my predecessor, Dan Fernandez, has said, the wood spacers are great because you can make those on your own. Sometimes they can be hard to find commercially available, but you can make the wooden ones on your own. But then again, you go out, you can put 1,000 wooden spacers throughout your fruit trees, and then you get one big wind and you have 1,000 wooden spacers on the ground. So the aluminum spacers really do stay put a lot better than the wooden spacers, but the wooden spacers do work. And once again, you take them out about late June. They've done their job at that point and they do need to come out. So that's something to think about. So now we'll talk about the stubs. In one of those other earlier videos, we talked about promoting new growth by leaving a nice stub there. And once again, particularly useful when removing a problem branch that originates in an area where you want a new branch. So you have a branch that's just growing the wrong way. You need to get rid of it. But you do want a branch in that area. Leave a nice stub. And in some of our high density plantings, this is a method that we use a lot. And by doing this, you can see, and on that picture on the left, we call these Dutch cuts, where we leave that stub to promote new growth out of there. And you can see we've got a pruning cut right there with that little stub that's kind of pointing upwards with new growth coming out of that. But then that's also that we pruned off was new growth that came off of another larger branch that we've cut. And you can see a number of examples in that left-hand picture. And then on the right hand, that's a freestanding field tree there. And you can see a pruning cut that we made last year. And we've stimulated that new growth. So we've got a brand new branch coming right out of that. So you leave that stub, you're gonna have enough budding material that's really gonna force some new growth. And so that's a method we really have come to like using.
Where can you find spacers?
So we have a question, where can you find spacers? So spacers can be tricky, and especially the aluminum ones, orchard supply companies, which there's not many around our area. So you usually have to look around the Pacific Northwest, sometimes New England. There's other orchard supply companies, but we've tried to find them, and they can be very difficult to find. So it's almost just scouring the internet and see what you can come up with. And if you can't find the aluminum spacers, sometimes the wooden ones just have to do. And they're a lot cheaper as well. The wooden one's a lot cheaper to use. And so we're looking at a tall spindle tree here, high density tree on a dwarf rootstock. And just going to do a quick demonstration on how to remove a branch that's taken up space and help us promote some new growth on there. So this tree is planted in a different scenario than the field trees that we were talking about earlier. This tree is planted in what we call a tall spindle method, and the difference is it's planted on a heavily dwarfing rootstock to keep the tree at a small size so it can be planted in a high density situation like what you see here. The reason for this is you can pack more trees per acre and get more production per acre, not necessarily more production per tree. And there's a certain way that we manage for this. We want to keep these trees compact, and we want a lot of small, heavily fruiting branches. And the way we prune to achieve that goal is what we call a Dutch cut. We've heard it called a few other things. I learned it as a Dutch cut, but essentially it's a certain method of pruning that will stimulate new growth from the branch we take off. So what we're doing, we want to assess the tree, and we want to look at large dominant branches that we want to remove and replace with small, heavily fruiting branches. As you can see, this is a perfect example. This branch is causing some shade for our lower branch. We're getting good new growth off of here, so we want to leave this one. We also want to maintain the symmetry of the tree. So this branch is the one I'm going to choose to remove. When doing this certain pruning technique, the idea is we want to leave more tissue at the bottom of the branch and angle the cut up towards the tree to stimulate growth from the bottom of that cut. As you can see, I left a lot more room below than I did above. And that's going to hopefully stimulate new growth. Now, since I took off a dominant branch off of this side, I want to concentrate on a different side of the tree to maintain that symmetry. Therefore, the next branch I'm going to be taking will be this one. We're getting it's creating a lot of shade for the lower branches. So we'll take our second branch. Okay, so that was just a quick demonstration on some different ways to remove some of those branches and really push out some of that new growth. That's just another way to do it. So now we'll talk a little bit about diameter-based pruning, especially whenever trees are planted in that scenario that you saw, the high density. Diameter-based pruning is really important. You know, anytime a branch starts getting really big and dominant, there's a point where it has to go. And rule of thumb, once again, about 50% the size of the leader, time for that branch to go. And then use a stub to promote new growth to replace that branch. Then you'll have a nice, brand new, smaller branch that should fit in just well. And this method also scaffold limbs as well. If you have a large branch coming off of a scaffold limb, once it starts getting too big, there's always that point where it does have to go. So we'll talk about when to prune. You start pruning the first season a tree's planted. It's the first thing you do once that tree's planted. And ideally you plant trees earlier in the spring before they really break dormancy, and that really helps to lessen the stress on the tree. So that's a great time to do that first pruning. If it's a whip, just a perfect little, sometimes you get that tree, it's a bare root tree, has no branches. There's the time for that heading cut. That's the first thing you want to do, is head that terminal bud and force some of those new branches. And then of course, pruning starts on a little seedling tree. You start out real light and you intensify the pruning as the tree ages. You can begin as early as January. Ideally around here, March is the ideal time to start your pruning. That's we try to target that, but it also depends on how many trees you have to prune. Out at Yellow Jacket, we have over 500 trees at this point. So we have to start early to make sure we get the bulk of that work done before we start going into bud break and before those trees start trying to break dormancy on us. So we start pretty early. We usually start in February to make sure we can get done. You can start as early as January. You don't want to start too early. We don't recommend starting in, say, December, because then those wounds are going to be really slow to heal, and they're going to be out there and more vulnerable for a longer period of time. Ideally, March is great because the trees are dormant. You essentially, those wounds won't be out there for that long until the tree breaks dormancy and starts healing those wounds. So that's the reason why March is pretty ideal. Got to do it before bud swell and bloom. That's the thing. Most of your pruning has to be done. You can do some summer corrective pruning. So that means, you get in there, you see some crossing branches, you see some things that are causing problems. You can get in there and do some minimal pruning throughout the summer, but we don't prune after August 1st. And especially here, that's really important because, as we've talked about, pruning promotes new growth. And past August 1st, we don't want those trees growing. We want those trees starting to slow down, starting to get ready for dormancy. And so you can actually create some stimulation from pruning. And if you prune after August 1st, we don't want, that's too late to stimulate the trees. We want them going dormant.
John has a question. If fruit only grows on 3-year-old limbs, wouldn't Dutch cuts that take you back to year 1 limit production?
So that's a great question. So we had a question, if it takes 3 years for those fruiting buds to develop, whenever we're doing those Dutch cuts, why is it ideal to do that and get rid of a lot of that fruiting wood? There's a couple of reasons why. Most of the time, those are done in a high density situation. And so therefore, we're taking out branches that are really starting to interfere with the neighbors in some cases, and then just getting too dominant for that growing method. The idea is with those high density trees is you want a lot of very small, heavily fruiting branches. And some of those dominant branches, they don't produce nearly as well. And you also try to identify branches that don't have that many fruiting buds on them. So those are usually the ones you're taking out. No, it seems a little counterintuitive, but the other thing is by the time those branches are that big and dominant, you have a lot of decadent fruiting buds, and they still produce good quality fruit, but your new fruiting buds that you're really trying to promote are going to produce a better quality fruit. So that is the premise behind that. So then we talked about our tree height. You want to avoid heading the tree. Cutting back to a weaker shoot is preferable. You can see in some of these areas, we don't have any dead ends. You can see where we took off some bigger branches, but then that goes into a smaller shoot. So we'll go into simplifying the tree. You want to use those thinning cuts to limit your forks. And this is coming back to that diameter-based pruning. You can see a lot of forks in here in this picture. We're going to want to simplify those out. This is in the upper reaches of a tree. If I were to start making some cuts, I would make one big cut. There's that branch you can see coming off to the left. I would make a cut just above that, get rid of that big dominant branch there, and then we have a nice new vegetative branch coming off of there. And that's going to limit a lot of shade. So the tree needs to be simple, and that if the tree's simplified, that's really going to make it a lot easier whenever you go out to start. You'll just kind of have an idea of exactly what you need to do. It'll take the guesswork out of it. And then striving for that horizontal look on those scaffold limbs on your central leader trees. Once again, they're like solar panels. You want that good solar radiation penetrating that canopy. So that's really what we're going for. those nice kind of more horizontal, about 60-degree branches. And let's see, I think we're getting pretty close on our time here, but this might be a good place to pause and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, we'll move on. I'm going to skip. This is a real short little video, but I'm going to skip this for now. And that one we talked about, I've got that whip right there. We're talking about planting a new tree. And essentially, this is the time for that heading cut. You want to come up, you want to take that terminal bud out of there. And that's going to push out your branching. The next year when you come back, you'll have some branching started. That's whenever your forming begins. That's whenever you start deciding which one of those branches you're going to use for your scaffold limbs. And we get back into where the symmetry is extremely important. But once again, pruning starts from day one. Now, I know a lot of people in this area, rehabilitation pruning is a very big deal. A lot of people will have trees on their property that have probably not been maintained for decades in some cases. And so whenever you go in and start to manage some of these trees that have been abandoned, we usually consider if it hadn't been pruned for 3 to 5 years, that's an abandoned tree. And you got to come in with these rehab techniques. And so the rehab techniques, you can't rush it. You got to take it slow. And it's going to take you about 5 years to actually get that tree back into balance. So we'll just kind of run through the stages of this. The first season, you get out, you want to remove those crossing, diseased, congested branches, thin out a little bit, no more than 30%. Of course, anything diseased, dead, all of that stuff has to go. This is where that 30% is critical. And I would even go more like 20 to 25%. You just want to be really minimal, just the worst problems in there and start getting those things down. The next season, season 2, this is whenever you can actually start trying to lower the height of the tree if needed. You can come in a little bit heavier. Once again, be real careful not to go over that 30% because we're trying to get that tree into balance. Season 3, you're back into removing smaller limbs. You can go a little bit heavier, but once again, just trying to be as minimal as you can. And then the 4th and 5th seasons are, they follow the same rule. You're just going a little bit more, but you're trying to keep that tree into balance because if you take too much, you'll pull that tree out of balance, you'll stress it too much, and then you'll have that vegetative mess going on, and you kind of start over from year 1. So it's really critical to just be really careful and just rehab them slow. You can't get in a hurry on that. And you can't expect it to take about 5 years to have a tree fully rehabbed. But that's a pretty big topic. I know a lot of people in this area have bought property that have old fruit trees that haven't been managed on them. They're really common in this area. And so if you're looking at trying to manage some of those, this is how you go about it, is you go through this rehab process. And with that, that's the end of our presentation. However, I would be very happy to open the floor to any questions, discussion that anybody would like to have. But once again, I'd like to thank everybody for bearing through this with us. Once again, technology was not always on our side this evening, and so thank you for putting up with our hiccups and as we got through our first virtual pruning workshop.
Now, Gus, John had one more question around the 45 degrees for optimal strength you had mentioned, but that's more on the bowl style. Is this just for open bowl style? Or, you mentioned more horizontal, so 60-degree angle for central leader trees.
That's a great question. So the question is, so with that 45, whenever we're looking for those ideal angles for those branches, now an open center tree, you're really looking for that about 45 degree. You want it like a nice base. Peaches, you're going to be a little bit shallower angles. Now with a central leader apple, you're looking for about 60 degrees because that's about the best balance between strength. You don't want them straight out because then you have weaker branches. they're about 60 degrees. They're still good and horizontal, and they can collect the most sunlight because you're really trying to maximize sunlight on those. Now with some of those open center trees, really 45-degree angles is pretty ideal. You don't want them too shallow because then you've got a tree that'll take up essentially way too much room. So that's a management consideration. And then any taller than that, then you're going to lose that sunlight penetration. So with that 45-degree on an open center tree like those plums, that's really where you're going to get that good balance between keeping the tree compact and also maximizing your light. And once again, anybody feel free to unmute, jump in. Oh yes, and we do have one final poll that we would like to show, and I'm going to need Greg's help to you were there. No, go that again. Isn't there a draw down? So let's see. Share results. That little one there. Oh, right there. Okay, so we're going to launch this poll. Right now, it's pretty simple. We need to know how we did on this. Were we helpful or not? And if we weren't, we really do want to know. All right, and my colleague here in the office has a message for the retired Dolores County Extension Director, Mr. Fernandez, to go Bills. They're both New Yorkers, so they definitely have that. They have their rivalry. For all of you who don't know, Dan is a Jets fan. Well, excellent. Well, we very much appreciate everybody joining us tonight. Once again, feel free, unmute. We can talk about anything that you'd like to. Also, please email us. I believe we had our email addresses on the first slide. So let's run back up there, make sure everybody knows how to contact us if needed, because we are here for you. PowerPoint's a little longer than I remembered it. Okay, so there's our contact information. You can always email either of us, call either of us. And this summer, hopefully, we would love to have you come out and see the Orchard Project in person. So yeah, open invitation. Please let us know. We're happy to come out and and host you out there and show you the project, show you how we do things, and work with you on whatever you need. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Appreciate coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Great job.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you.
We look forward to seeing you as well, John.
Thank you very much.
Philip, I know early on you had a question in the chat regarding varieties that may do well at 8,000 feet.
Yes, I did.
So typically there are a few, and I can't remember my list off the top of my head, but I did a presentation for Eric McPhail up in Gunnison County on apple trees that may work in the Gunnison Valley. And so I put that together, and I think that I'd be happy if you fire me an email. I will be happy to send you that presentation because it does have some varieties. But what you're going to run into with that is we definitely have varieties out there that will withstand those cold temperatures. So really what that means is the tree will survive, but it may never bear fruit. And it may take years to actually get that tree to bear fruit because they'll just be, the growing seasons are that short to where the tree's development's going to be a lot slower. But it's not to say it's impossible, because nothing is impossible.
Okay. Well, I just have 4 trees, so we'll see.
Absolutely. How long have they been growing?
I think 2 and 4 years. I planted 2 4 years ago and then 2 years ago. They're wealthy and state fair, and the wealthy ones are not doing so well. So,
Well, the 4-year-old trees, hopefully you'll start to see some blooms coming in the springtime.
I hope so. I'm going to try doing some pruning after watching this.
Excellent. Well, once again, fire me an email. I'm happy to talk on the phone or yeah, and really try to get you any resources that you're interested in.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming tonight.
Hey, Gus,
you.
you were talking about blooming after 4 years. I've got about 7 trees, and this will be their 5th year, and I've never seen a bloom on them yet. Is that abnormal, or does that just mean I'm likely to have a good year?
Well, you're likely to have a good year. That they'll come into their own. And sometimes the rootstock can make a big difference on that. Sometimes your larger full-size rootstocks will take a few years longer to come into production, whereas the dwarf rootstocks should come into production in 3 years. That's another reason why the commercial guys really like them. They come into production sooner and they can start paying off their investment. So that may be something, but I'd watch them really close this year, John, because this may be it.
Okay, well, they're EMLA 111, so I gather that's a larger tree.
That's a full size. Yep, those are going to get big.
Okay, great, thanks.
You bet. So any other questions for us while we've got everybody on the line? Well, okay, once again, I'm going to end our meeting here tonight. But once again, thank you guys all very, very much. We sure appreciated having everybody, and thanks for helping us muddle through our technological issues as we learn the best ways to do these things.
You want to stop recording first?